Good morning, everyone. Come on, we can do better than that. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I want to thank you, General President Schaitberger, and for your kind invitation and your words. And I am deeply honored to be here this morning. I must tell you, Mr. President, as I stood in the green room over there and watched your speech, it almost brought me to tears. When you said, if you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, that was music to my heart. And the reason why it was music to my heart is because every day in the Oversight Committee, I see the attacks on unions. And you're absolutely right, Mr. President. They are attacking unions, period. And it's over and over and over again, and it is relentless. And that is why your voices are so very, very important. And first of all, I came by here to simply say thank you for what you do every day. When I came in the door, somebody came up to me and said, "We like your politics." I said, no, this is not about politics for me. This is what I truly believe. This is what my father, a former sharecropper from South Carolina, been making 15 cents a day, came to Baltimore, joined the union, and made $1 an hour. That's a raise. Got health care benefits, time and a half for overtime, and safe working conditions. It was unions that did that. It was unions. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. You are the last line of defense. You are. Look at your neighbor. You are. You're the last line. And you're right, Mr. President. There are those that want to destroy unions. But I just came by here, first of all, to tell you that I got your back. I got your back. I also want to thank the nearly 800 IAFF members who are in the audience, many of whom have traveled long distances to be here today. I know that you have a lot to do this week, and we'll be hearing from a number of my congressional colleagues, as well as my good friend, Vice President Joe Biden. But before I get started on these challenges facing the Congress, again, I want to say thank you. And I want to remind you, and I mean, people come to my office all the time, Mr. President, and they come and I'm already on their side. I want you to go to somebody who nullifies my vote. Go to them. You can come by my office and wave and say thank you, but go to them. Tired of my vote being nullified. And so many of you are federal firefighters and know all too well that these past few years have been difficult for federal workers. As part of the federal government's efforts to reduce the deficit and pay for unemployment benefits for millions of workers, federal employees have had to sacrifice nearly $140 billion as a result of a 3-year pay freeze. We're better than that. They also face pay cuts in the form of increased retirement contributions for newly hired employees. They also had to endure sequestration cuts and furloughs and a 16-day government shutdown. Legislation has also required budget cuts, pay freeze extensions, arbitrary workforce cuts, increases in retirement contributions, decreases in retirement benefits, and the elimination of federal pensions. That's not how you treat people you value. That's not how you treat people who give their blood, their sweat, and their tears, and so often their lives for you. Budget cuts have caused the federal government to eliminate jobs for the last 3 years in a row. For 2014, the government lost 19,000 jobs, not including postal jobs. Continued job losses in the federal government may endanger agency missions and disrupt vital services to the public. These events, as well as relentless attacks on the pay and benefits of federal workers, have caused federal workforce morale to drop to historic lows. The Partnership for Public Service found that worker morale and engagement fell each of the last 4 years to an all-time low. Satisfied and engaged federal workers are critical to achieving government missions and delivering vital public services. Congress cannot continue to target the federal workforce to achieve deficit reduction without causing serious consequences. Our government and the American people need and deserve a motivated and engaged federal workforce. As I say over and over again in my committee, we as a nation, we are better than that. We know what happened to federal workers in the last Congress, but what can they expect in this Congress? Unfortunately, I believe we will see an unprecedented and extremely damaging assault by congressional Republicans to reduce worker pay, gut their due process protections, and slash the benefits that they and their families rely on every single day. I fear that much of that kind of legislation will move through my committee, where I am ranking member. But I remain committed to defending federal workers to the best of my ability. So help me God. For example, we will likely see the introduction of bills to reduce the size of the federal workforce. It's still early in the new Congress, but bills have already been introduced that would cut the government budget by up to 5%. Other bills would cut the federal workforce by 10% through attrition and slash civilian defense workforce by 15%. Continuing the saga of bad policy, just last week, Congress nearly forced the Department of Homeland Security into a shutdown, a situation that would have not only put the paychecks of thousands into jeopardy, but also put the lives of millions at risk. We're better than that. Sequestration budget cuts are scheduled to return for fiscal year 2016, unless Congress modifies them. I'm concerned that the House Republicans will propose increasing the budget cap for the Department of Defense and then offset this increase with even deeper cuts in non-defense agency budgets. They will likely use a reconciliation bill as a vehicle for finding savings, which may include provisions for decreasing retirement benefits. We could also see legislation that would eliminate federal pensions for new hires. Last week, Congress passed and the President signed a bill that gave the VA Secretary greater authority to fire executives without notice or an opportunity to respond to charges. We may see legislation that would apply these provisions to rank and file employees government-wide. I think we need to be very careful when we are considering legislation that would reduce due process rights for federal employees. These due process protections exist for a reason. They date back to 1883, when our government was trying to address abuses and corruption in the federal government. Without the protections of the Pendleton Act and other statutes, there's a very real risk of politicizing our federal workforce, returning our civil service back to a system of patronage. We're better than that. Some propose making federal employees at-will employees. They argue that the federal personnel system is too protective of employee rights, making it difficult to get rid of poor performers. They claim that we need to revise the law. My response is that the tools to deal with poor performance are already there, but that managers are not using them. In 2009 study of how the federal government addresses poor performance, MSPB concluded that failure to address poor performance lies with managers, stating, and I quote, addressing poor performance by merely changing a law that sets forth how to demote or remove a poor performer is not a feasible solution. Rather, the government must concentrate on managing the performance of its employees, end of quote. We may also see legislation that would require agencies to fire federal employees who are delinquent on their taxes. Now, don't get me wrong. I think everybody should pay their taxes. But this legislation would actually be counterproductive. Instead of enabling the payment of bills, federal employees terminated from their jobs would be unable to pay anything. My priority is to do whatever I can to help federal workers obtain fair compensation and meaningful pay raises. The federal workforce is lagging far behind the private sector in pay increases. In fact, your pay is not even keeping pace with the growth of inflation. That is simply unacceptable. President Obama's budget for next year recommends a 1.3% pay raise for federal employees. I simply believe that is too low. I'm a co-sponsor with Representative Connolly of the FAIR Act, which would raise federal worker pay by 3.8%. I will also continue to strongly support whistleblower protections. We need to be ever vigilant in protecting the rights of the brave men and women who speak out against waste, fraud, and abuse, and threats to health and safety. This past September, I filed an amicus brief, along with Senators Grassley and Wyden and Congressman Issa, Farinholtz, and Lynch, in support of whistleblower Robert McLean's appeal to the United States Supreme Court. Mr. McLean was a former air marshal with the Transportation Security Administration, who was terminated for publicly disclosing that the agency planned on grounding air marshals from long-distance flights due to budget restraints and despite knowledge of imminent al-Qaeda attacks. I'm pleased to report that the Supreme Court recently ruled in Mr. McLean's favor. I'm also working on introducing legislation that would strengthen enforcement of anti-discrimination and whistleblower retaliation laws. This is a top priority. Finally, let me say this. Congress needs to devote resources and attention to strengthening recruitment and retention of federal government workers. We need to attract the best. We need to attract the brightest. Otherwise, we will be in a danger of making the federal government the employer of last resort. We also need to guard against challenges to the merit system principles and due process rights. We need to ensure that federal hiring process is as open, fair, and competitive as it can be. Finally, I want to assure you that despite all the talk on Capitol Hill about rolling back benefits of our public employees, in the face of all the attacks that have devastated morale and failed to show the true commitment those that put their lives on the line for the greater good, I want you to understand that there are those in the Congress who will stand with you over and over and over again. And as I close, I have been more than happy to support and fully support the robust funding for both the SAFER grant and the Assistance to Firefighters grant program in the past, and will do so again. With IAFF members in each of 435 congressional districts, you have done so much for the American people. And I just saw the firefighters, Mr. President, in action a few weeks ago. My 88-year-old mother, who is a pastor of a church, a small church in Baltimore, only about 100 members. On a Sunday morning, one of the preachers got up to preach, and he was about, I guess he must have been about 78 years old. And as he began to preach, he fell over, apparent heart attack. The next thing I knew, within minutes, and I will remember this until the day I die, within minutes, firefighters came in and they did everything they could to save his life, used every instrument they had. I mean, they worked for 45 minutes. Unfortunately, he passed. But I shall never forget talking to his widow. She said, the thing that meant so much to me is when I saw the firefighters and paramedics do everything in their power to bring him back to life. That's what you do every day. That's what you do. And not only that, so much of the public do not understand that when you retire, you have a short life expectancy. I know all about it because I served as the Workmen's Compensation Chair in the Maryland legislature. And so I've come here to thank you. But I just don't want you to think that you're by yourself. We are soldiers in an army. We've got to fight, although we might cry. We have to hold up the bloodstained banner. We have to hold it up until we die. Thank you.